keep my heart set upon your voice, knowing that your word, it never comes back void. No weapon will prosper, no enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Pastor Tim Carskadden here with Zach Carskadden and our engineer, Eric Lally, back over there with us, helping us today here on the 29th day of July, 2024, our noon prayer watch that we have been doing for now 4 years. Been working on this, and we're in studio today. It's temporary, but we're in studio here at Christian Center Shreveport. Our pipeline report, and give us grace today. We're trying to work out some bugs, but we hope to let this be a platform for us in the future. I'll let Zach share a little bit in a few minutes why he's here now, but we're excited about what God's going to do through this platform on Mondays especially, and obviously we're going to stretch that a little bit as the time goes by. As we get closer to the election, we want to make sure that we're helping you, giving you the information you need to pray, get prayer initiatives, as well as being informed to share with your neighbors. I think one of the things we did last week, we shared the video from Mark Nuttall about the influence within the local community and how important that is as far as the voting sequences go, who we should vote for down ballot, et cetera. And people put their trust more in their local friends than they do on any national platform or any other media source, that they want to talk to people around them, business owners, people that live in their community. What do you feel? Because we realize that these people are the people that are invested in their lives, their monies, everything into their being where they are. And so they know what the person or the people that can best help that community. So we're going to help you with that and vet you with that along the way, give you that needed information. I think it's critical in this hour as we go. So much has happened this last weekend, as you've seen through the crisis of Israel. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. President Trump, who was assassination attempt, and all the events surrounding that, and then of course President Biden dropping out of the 2024 race, and Kamala Harris coming to the forefront, which is a lot of prophetic. Foresaw that. We're not surprised by that. But we need to know how to deal with that and how to walk that out. I think her record, they're trying to scrub the internet with, or past, but fortunately you can't scrub everything out there, and we'll be able to pull up some of that information for you, as well as you'll see that on national media outlets where they'll actually pull up her history. I know there are sites that gov.track, which is a bipartisan organization that marked her as the most liberal senator in America. They retracted that, but now they've actually admitted that that is true. And so I think we're in a season where we have to shout from the mountaintop what's going on. But what do we do prophetically? What are we saying? What is our call as a watchman? And that's what this pipeline report is about. yes, we're giving you information, but we also want you to be watchmen on the wall. That's what we're asking you to do. I'd encourage you. The Christian International did a conference. I think it was called the Watchman Conference the last week or so. You can go on YouTube. It's on there, I know, and Google or I should say, search the event with Chuck Pierce on that Watchman and listen to his message that he gave about where we are in the nation with the coming election, everything. He has some great insight. And I shared it a little bit yesterday in our sermon, but Chuck said that this is a moment of what we call the shamar, our watchman prophets. And these prophets are critical right now because these prophets not only watch what's going on, but they pray, they prophesy what's happening, and then they watch over the word. And I was pulling up my passages here, and the one that came to me was Psalm 127, verse 1. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the, they labor in vain, guards the city." And this is a portion that we have as watchmen, is to watch over our cities, to watch over our nation. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain to build it, unless the Lord guards the city. So he is a guard over the city, and we as watchmen, these are examples of what a shamar watchman is. Another one is in Psalms 130, verse 6. Let me turn there. It says, "My soul waits for the Lord more than a watchman for the morning. Indeed, more than a watchman for the morning." Another passage also is in Isaiah 62:6. It said, "I've set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem, which will never hold their peace day or night, yet they make mention of the Lord, keep not silence." And then another one is Song of Songs 3:3. "A watchman that go about the city found me, of whom I said, saw ye, and my soul, the soul, my thing that my soul loves." And so we see this word shamar, the Hebrew word, which is a watchman. It's an active person, it's an active being in the kingdom who is not only watching for what's happening, but they're praying into it. Let me give you an example. If you have a prophetic word over your city, let's say, or over your family, let's make it more personal. And God has said your family's going to start a business, or your family's going to all come into salvation. That's a better one. Then okay, that's a prophetic word, and God gave you that word, and you prophesy that word. Well, okay, you just sit there and wait for it? No, you pray into it, you watch over it. And so when God starts speaking, he'll give other words, and you start prophesying those words as well, and you participate. And then in 1 Timothy 1:18 says that we war with our prophetic words. So when you see the opposite happening, in other words, your family's going into a crisis, you start prophesying again. You say, no, that's not what the prophecy says. The word of the Lord says this, and you start participating with it. Think about how many words that are out there in the world, especially on social media now, that people are not watching over. They're not praying over them. They're not caring for them, nurturing them. When you read Corinthians, you'll see Paul's passion for the Corinth church. He just constantly is in labor for them. He's constantly praying that God would form his image in them, and he longs for them to come into the fullness of their purpose. That's how we should be right now. Prophetic watchmen should be that way right now. That's what we're trying to do on this. Israel. Israel is in crisis right now. You saw the events of this past weekend, where the bombing of the soccer field in a Druze community up in the Golan Heights. Let me say this to you: if you don't know what a Druze is, it's spelled Druze. It's a Arabic people that live in Israel. They're all over Israel. They didn't tend to have their villages, especially up in the north in the Golan area. We've been up there many times. They have great food, by the way, great restaurants, and some wonderful, wonderful people. Very loyal to Israel. Very loyal to the IDF. They work within the Knesset, etc. They're a very big part of what happens in Israel. And the Iranians, through Hezbollah, shot a missile into the soccer field and killed at least 12 children. I'm not sure how many adults died, and they've already had their funerals, etc., in the land. And it's just such a tragedy. Hezbollah's kind of reeling from that because the last thing they want to do is hit Arab villages. That was their goal, I'm sure. I mean, possibly it was an accident. They didn't mean to hit that place, but they did mean to hit Israel. And now they're in a bind. They're trying to put out fake news that it was actually Israel did it, which is not working. Hezbollah, as recently I heard, taken uh, credit for doing it. And now Israel must respond. Now the world is panicking, doesn't want them to do this, doesn't want them to participate this way as far as doing. But let me play this news clip. Kind of gives you an update of what happened if you didn't get to see the news this weekend. See if we can get that video up there.
Inside that hospital behind me with serious injuries in what's been the deadliest day here in Israel since the October 7th attacks. This video is the moment the IDF says an Iranian-made Hezbollah rocket landing near a soccer field in a Druze community in the Golan Heights, killing at least 12 people there, with most being children, injuring dozens more. Hezbollah, however, denying responsibility for the attack. It immediately spiked tensions at the northern border with Lebanon, where the IDF and Hezbollah have been trading fire daily. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu currently flying back to Israel after a trip to the U.S. This as fighting in Gaza, of course, continues. Another 30 people killed there in an Israeli strike at a school-turned-shelter. And with all of this coming just one day before negotiators were set to resume ceasefire discussions in Rome.
And Matt, as you noted there, Israel and Hezbollah.
So there we go. We see the event. Now that a lot has changed since I actually lost it. I think I jumped out of Restream. Can you hear me? You still hear me? Okay. I didn't mean to do that. I jumped out of Restream. But as you saw the event, Prime Minister Netanyahu is back in Israel. He has arrived back there, and he is now negotiating with, not negotiating, he's having talks with the military as far as what the response will be. I think they've given him full authority. As far as I can understand, they've given him full authority to respond to however he needs to respond. And so they're making decisions now on what they're going to do. The world is saying, back off, don't do anything bad. We'll see what happens in the midst of all this. That's kind of what they're talking about. But the fact is that they have to respond. We are seeing some small bombings as far as in southern Lebanon, doing some strategic sites. We know this, that the top leadership of Hezbollah has moved out of their places they normally are. Air traffic control is being limited into Beirut right now. Most flights are only going out; they're not coming in. Also, one report this morning that trains from southern Israel, from like Tel Aviv, other Jerusalem, are not going up to Haifa area, the northern part of Israel, until Sunday. So you're stopping all traffic up in that area as well, which is a good indication that something is being planned and something is in process of happening in that area. So we want to pray over Israel. It's a very difficult situation. You think about all the events that are going on with them right now, all the battle fronts that they have right now. We need to be covering Israel and covering their purpose in the land right now, and especially the prime minister and his cabinet, that they would have wisdom on what to do in this area. Now, America and other countries are pressuring them to not retaliate at this time. This is the last thing President Biden wants. He feels like this affects his election because most of this tension is because of a weak America anyway. Hezbollah, Syria, Turkey, other countries are not afraid of America anymore, basically because of our weak leadership. So therefore, they feel emboldened to do these events. If you didn't hear, the Turkish president, Erdogan, made a statement this week that they should invade Israel and attack Israel like Saddam Hussein did. So you're hearing these type of statements. Don't forget that America has B-52 bombers in Turkey. We have a base there in Adana area. I've been there. So we actually have assets in the country. So this is a very tenuous moment for America. We are based there. And if we can't base ourselves in Turkey, we're in a bind because it's a strategic place for us. So we need to pray. That's a lot to get information to give you, but we need to cover Israel right now in that place. So, all right, I got Zach with me today. Glad to have him. Zach has moved back to Shreveport. So you want to speak to that, Zach, but then also speak to our issue on Israel, if you will.
Yeah, first I'll start with Israel. We two parts is think from an Israeli standpoint of view, they are being bombarded, but also internally they're having a very interesting dynamic. You have those on the left and the right really attacking the leadership of Israel in Netanyahu. And so that's something we need to pray for, is that his administration and the coalition there stay together, because that tearing apart right now would be the worst thing for Israel's defense, because the enemy will see, and this is why Hamas attacked in the first place in Gaza, is they saw a weakness from the leadership there. And there's no real outcome as far as who would take leadership positions moving forward. And you're starting to see this partnership from those here on the left in America and those on the far right in Israel, who they think that kind of opposite of what the left in Israel thinks is the left in Israel thinks, oh, everything's fine. We need to go back, just peace, peace, peace. Whereas the far right in Israel says they're going hard, go after it. But you have an issue within the Israeli military that they're kind of ignoring and not being intellectually honest about, where Netanyahu is very limited on what he can do. Those same generals who were in the position who allowed an attack from Hamas in Gaza, who had all the information, where you're seeing those on the far right here in America say, well, this was a conspiracy from Netanyahu to allow this to happen. It wasn't. It was incompetence, as we saw with what just happened, last week with President Trump. There was a lack of strength from Israel, just like the Secret Service. And so the Netanyahu coalition needs prayer right now to be able to learn how to strategize and really deal with these generals who are not doing their job, because their public proclamations to the world are that these generals are that, well, Israel's fine. We're not really going to, wipe out Hamas, even though Netanyahu and his coalition is like, no, that's our stated goal. And if you heard his speech yesterday or last week before Congress at the joint session there with the Senate, is that, look, he's like, look, we're here defending. We're the front lines. Is we need your support. And that is ultimately true. And no matter what certain independents would like to say, and even though people want to avoid war, is, look, Israel doesn't have that choice. They don't have that option there to say, oh, we want to avoid war. War was brought to their doorfront because of a lack of defending their borders. And now that is unfortunate, but also to the point you just made, is the United States has assets in those regions still. We pulled out from Afghanistan. We understand the debauchery there, but we still have assets in Iraq. We still have assets in those regions where we're attacked. And if, Iraq or Iran and the Houthis and everybody's coming to attack Israel, they got to go through the United States along the way. And so our men and women are over there. They're defending those territories, those bases that other men and women who have died and fought for. And so this is where our prayers need to be centered on, okay, Lord, we want to stand for freedom in these regions, because whether we agree with the invasion of Iraq, whether we agree with the invasion of Iran, it has brought forth Afghanistan, excuse me. It has brought forth a wave of freedom in the sense of spiritual and religious freedom that is not necessarily being talked about.
Yeah.
And also you see in Africa and other regions where there are Christians being persecuted, there are other minorities being persecuted, but the term goes, as a lot of Jewish pundits say, is no Jews, no news. And so that's kind of a position that we need to understand, is there's still, not only with what's going on in Israel, but there's still other atrocities taking place. And that's where we need to really pray for the Netanyahu administration, that they have strength to, because they're having to get over these hurdles. The reason they can't do what they should, what we would think they should do, is because there are major roadblocks preventing them from doing that. But the good thing is, we were talking about this before, the good thing is that the people of Israel understand and they are behind Netanyahu. That's good for now. And let's pray that that stays, because it gets to if you pluck up Netanyahu, what are you putting in its place? And right now, nobody knows.
Yeah, and the polls right now show Netanyahu is leading in any poll against any other possible prime minister in the land. Now, on the negotiation of the hostage crisis, one of the things we're seeing is that one of the things that Netanyahu has added to the negotiation is that the Philadelphia corridor, they call it, which is right outside the southern part of Rafah in Egypt. It's a small corridor, probably 400 feet or so, whatever, and determines who comes in from Egypt into the Gaza. Israel is demanding now that they secure that area, which is a new requirement on the ceasefire as well as a negotiation for the hostages, which I think he has to. We've proven now with all the tunnels that all the weapons and all the paraphernalia coming, and as well as terrorists coming from Egypt into Israel, into Gaza, have come through that corridor. So that's another thing that's going to be very difficult for everybody to deal with. Okay, so that's our focus on Israel. We want to pray again. What Zach said there, what I said is very important. It is an American issue as much as it is an Israeli issue, and we are very engaged in that. This administration is trying to really delicately go through this process because they're not that they're concerned about the issue so much, they're concerned about the reelection issue, and they don't want this to harm their reelection opportunities. So that's sad because people's lives are on the line in those areas. Okay, let's pivot here. We're going to talk about President Biden's proposal right now to change the Supreme Court. I want to play a clip here what his plans are, which is quite alarming to say the least. Let me read my New York Times one. This is the headline here. It says Biden and Harris debut plan to overhaul the Supreme Court with focus on limiting Trump's powers. That's the point. Let me play the little clip from Fox, and they'll tell you an update on what it is. Can't hear that.
Court. This happening literally a minute ago. These would include no immunity for crimes a former president committed in office, term limits for Supreme Court justices, and a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Joe Biden also releasing a new op-ed this morning saying in part, quote, "This nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law. Not the President of the United States, not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, no one. I have overseen more Supreme Court nominations as senator, vice president, and president than anyone living today. I have great respect for our institutions and separation of powers. What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms. We now stand in a breach." Katie Cherkasky is a constitutional law attorney and former federal prosecutor. She's here now to react. Katie, that's a mouthful. What's your reaction to those plans?
Well, these are very pie in the sky type of ideas. Nothing about the Supreme Court reforms could be immediately implemented, but it certainly shows the position of the Democrat Party. They don't like the outcome of the court's ruling, so they want to change the rules here. So many of these reforms would require, if not legislation, actual constitutional amendments. So again, not politically viable at the moment, but certainly a strong and radical position.
Yeah, such an...
Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. That's a good point, what she makes there. It's not viable. Zach, let's talk about this. This is a constitutional issue. And I think that the news headlines are just trying to put a lot of fear in people as far as what is the plans of the president are. Everything that he's proposing has to be passed by Congress, by Senate and by Congress. That's the reality. So you can't arbitrarily add seat. Roosevelt tried this to add seat, to pack the court, to make this immunity thing go, because they're trying to prosecute President Trump. That's what this is about. This isn't about justice. This isn't about making a wrong a right. This is about a control. It's also, and this is what I have great concerns for, should President Trump win the election. They're trying to set it where he cannot be successful as a president by setting what we call booby traps, if you want to call it that his hands will be tied once he's in office. That's what the plan of the enemy is here. This is what we gotta ask for exposure or in prayer, and that it be thwarted by the Lord, the plans of the enemy, so that if he does win this election, that he has the wherewithal to reverse the curse, help change the course of our nation with the Lord's help. We believe this can happen. So let's talk about this, Zach. What's that look like if he tries to propose these things? How do you think the Congress will respond to that?
Well, there's two major roadblocks that the Biden administration is going to have to overcome, and thankfully, this goes back to our founding. And Rick Joyner's been pointing this out very clearly in a lot of his writings. Is we have to go back to what our founding original intent of our nation is, and that Fox News pundit pointed it out very clearly, is the way the three branches of government is set up. This is not a decision for the president to make. Number one, this is a constitutional amendment that would have to be passed via the 2/3 vote of the public, which is going to be extremely hard in this political climate. But then, too, you're going to most likely have this even be brought up to be a constitutional amendment by Congress and the Senate to agree upon to even get to that point. So we should thank our lucky stars that our founders understood that there would be people at some point in time who would want to use what they deem as their own individual, intellectual ideas to gain power. And two, the second biggest roadblock is that the Supreme Court just made a decision on this very same topic that proved that presidents have immunity to make decisions once they're in office. And so seeing that the Supreme Court just ruled on this very decision is really just a waste of time, but then also taxpayer dollars. And it's really just to rile up and get their voting bloc upset and angry and motivate. And this is what it's coming down to. It's good to get them motivated to want to get out and vote, because that's what it's going to come down to. Because they have to think, okay, Biden's not in there. If Kamala's in there,
Right.
Go back to her when she ran her presidential campaign in 2020. She didn't even get 1% of the Democratic vote. So they're having to figure out ways to try to motivate people to get out and vote. And that's going to be the thing that, if we're looking at these two candidates, and okay, you say RFK Jr.'s there, the question is, well, okay, he's not going to really pull much, but the question is, are people going to go out and vote? And that's going to be the huge issue. And so this is just something to get at people's emotions and make them angry and make them want to go out there and vote.
Okay, so I heard an interview with CNN and Elizabeth Warren, and on this topic concerning the court and packing the court, et cetera, all the different ideas. Let me play this little clip that she has, and we'll talk about Elizabeth Warren here in a second. But it's a good question by Trapper on what is the realistic part of what could they do.
Issues President Biden said he would focus on in the remainder of his term is reform of the U.S. Supreme Court. Among the changes he's reportedly considering are term limits and an enforceable ethics code for justices. Now, you've been working on this issue in the Senate. What realistically do you think you could get through Congress? Not what should be, but what do you think you could actually accomplish?
Yeah, well, I think we've got all the Democrats who are ready for meaningful ethics reform to bind the Supreme Court. And we're working on changes to the Supreme Court. It can be term limits. It could be adding the number of justices, things we can do without having to have a constitutional amendment. I think what President Biden is doing is think about this moment. Here is a man who's been a transformative president. He's got an enormous amount done. And yet he has stepped away and he has passed the torch to Kamala Harris. Why has he done that? He's done it as an act of patriotism for our nation. And he is saying we not only have to have a president who is here for the nation and who will heal us and bring us together, we also have to change our Supreme Court, because right now we have a Supreme Court that has basically jumped the guardrails and is out there giving power to the president, saying that the president can commit any act that the president wants, saying that Congress cannot authorize agencies to act. So we've got a Supreme Court that is actively undermining our democracy. And I think what Joe Biden will do over the next 6 months is he's going to keep drawing that to the attention of the American people and reminding them when they vote in November, the Supreme Court is on the ballot.
She is right. She's absolutely right. That is on the ballot. And that's why this election is so critical. It's hard to listen to that. The narrative, obviously, it's bent her direction. He asked her a question, what could she possibly do? We're talking big picture, but what could you actually do? She gave no answer to that whatsoever. She moved it to a campaign speech for Biden, which is, if he gets elected, then we can do stuff. So they have no answer. They know they can't do anything. So this is to stir up the base. This is to excite their voters to say that, hey, this crazy Supreme Court, which is tearing down our democracy, which is a lie. They're constitutional interpreters is what they do. They interpret the Constitution. They rule accordingly. And if they were to pass such things, they don't understand how that could backfire on them. They don't even think about that. They live for the moment, and this moment, it's a poverty spirit. You live for that moment. You don't think of the future. You're not thinking of where this goes down the road. So we've got to understand that fortunately, don't get caught up in the hype. Hey, they're going to do all this stuff. They're not going to be able to. The fact is, this is just a pitch to put fear in the voters and to cause the voters to shift and vote the other direction. That's why we have to dispel it with truth. And that's what we're trying to do today. Go ahead and speak that.
In a biblical sense, is we have to continue to be watchmen, because when the watchmen are not on the wall, they could get away with this stuff. And think about past generations. Is I've heard from older generations recently is they repented for getting off the wall. And so now we've repented and we've realized the need to continue to stand on the wall. And so that's what we need to do now and into the future, and teach future generations. This is why we stand on the wall, so that ideas like this that they know are unconstitutional, that they know cannot pass without Congress, even though she's saying, well, this prevents Congress from doing something. And it's like, that's the point, is because the president has to be able to make decisions knowing that they're able to protect and make decisions that are secure for the security of the nation, even though they may be controversial at the time. I mean, think now, even on the far right, is the controversy of dropping a nuclear bomb on Japan. You go talk to the Japanese, they're like, if you didn't do that, we would have every single person in Japan would have been wiped out, because they were not going to surrender, but they realized the power of that. But that's a separate issue. And the point here, to what Elizabeth Warren is saying, she knows, and she's trying to help the best she can, is that if Kamala Harris is on that ticket, the Democrats are going to need a motivator to get people out. And look, I'll give it to the Democrats. We have to, is they know how to work in unison, even though they may not fully agree with these ideas, or maybe they do. That's not necessarily the argument. The argument is they're working in unison. And if the body of Christ, not just Republicans, if the body of Christ would stand on biblical foundations, be watchmen, stand on the wall, pray for life. What were the 3 F's that Mike Johnson keeps talking about? Faith, family, and freedom.
Yep.
If we could stand on those 3 F's right there, then we could continue to hold the ground and see righteousness prevail, see lawfulness, not lawlessness, prevail here in the days ahead.
And I read an article by, I'm trying to remember who wrote that, Stephen Moore. And it was an opinion piece, but he had a criteria for the best and worst presidents in America, and not climate, but economy, and the way they ran the country through corruption, et cetera. And he listed the 5 worst presidents in the history of America, 5 worst. And number 1 was Woodrow Wilson. We're not old enough to know that story. Herbert Hoover, I read enough about that to know that to be true. Then number 3 was Jimmy Carter. I lived through that one. Joe Biden and Barack Obama. Those are the 5 worst presidents in the history of America. So it kind of tells you their policies have created a lack of what we believe in, what the American dream is, and what we're going after. And right now, we cannot be deceived in this moment of what is happening, and we must be encouraged. Now, I played a clip on my podcast last week about a dream that one prophet had concerning the next election. They've actually pulled that video down. I don't know who pulled it down, but it got pulled down where he prophesied. He had a dream that President Trump won. And in the dream, though, he said it was very difficult in office, if you listen to my podcast, because of how many problems there were in the White House. And that's why we're bringing up these topics, because we don't want that. Should he be able to be put in office, we want him to have a clean slate, an opportunity to really bring justice and bring democracy, or the republic, back to what it needs to be. That's our cry. That's our heart's cry. We want America to be what God called it to be. And if we don't have the freedoms to share the good news and share the gospel of the kingdom in all the earth, then we've lost our foundations. If we don't at least have standards of Judeo-Christian values, morals in our land, we do not have a hope and a future. That is where our hope and our future lies, in the Lord and in his foundations. And without it, like I said there in Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. So what we see here is we see the left. So the watchman keeps awake in vain if the Lord doesn't participate in this. So if the Lord is not building our nation right now with us and putting the right people in office, then it's all in vain. and we can't go there. That's why we have to expose this stuff. That's why we need you, part of our pipeline report, our 318 company, partnering with us in prayer, and then sharing with your friends, sharing with those that you care about. Send these videos out. Do whatever you can do to influence them with the truth, not trying to manipulate anybody, but trying to get the truth to them so that we can be these true watchmen, and we don't watch in vain. So we're partnering with the Lord. He builds it, and we partner with him, and we labor with him. And that's what this ministry is about. We're laboring with the Lord in that area. You want to add anything to that, Zach?
And we have to realize we have to stay humble and not push our agendas forward. Again, if we see the list there of those presidents, is one of the main knocks against most of them. And let's take Woodrow Wilson, for example, is he was probably one of the most arrogant presidents that we know of. And some of the decisions that he made, military leaders were telling him, don't do this. Like, this is the worst decision you could ever possibly do. And he did it anyway because he thought his ideas were the best. And so that's where we in our hearts have to humble ourselves and be mindful and have our radars up to tune into what the Lord is saying in this season, so that we can walk in what the Lord's saying in a God idea, not necessarily just
Yeah.
a good idea. And that even goes for President Trump himself. Is there are a lot of ideas economically, trade wise, with that JD Vance and President Trump both agree with, that maybe in the short term might work, but in the long term are going to be detrimental to our country, and it's going to hurt the reality, the poorest of the poor. And we can't be so idolized by who's in office or who's running for office and think that every decision that they make is pure gold. And it's not. They have to stay humble, just as we have to stay humble, just as Nebuchadnezzar had to stay humble, and any leader throughout biblical history would show us is we have to stay humble and on our knees before the Lord and hearing what he has to say to guide us through the season ahead, because if without the Lord building it, we labor in vain.
Okay, so that's that's our topics today. We thank you for listening. I'm gonna let Zach kind of share why he's in Shreveport now and his role here. We're so glad he's with us, and we're back in the studio here. We'll be doing a lot of different things. We have a lot of vision for the future now that he's here on campus. So share that, Zach, with the people, and some of our plans for the pipeline report in the days ahead.
So to make a long story short, for about the past year, when I started my podcast, I was thinking about, the next season of life, growing my family, and we made some great connections in North Carolina, great people, great churches, but some things just settled in our heart to really seek out, okay, do we want to firmly establish ourselves there or move somewhere where we need to be? And just through that journey, we've had personal dreams, prophetic from other people, that really just called me back to Shreveport and to bring my family. And we had some connections and relationships to kind of walk through, and we had some commitments that we had to honor. That's why it kind of took so long. But in reality, is for me and my family, we realized the best decision of where to firmly establish ourselves. Hey, because it's purely God that I'm here, not out of my own fleshly desires to be here. That's why we're here. And Shreveport is a great community. There's so much potential here. There's always been potential, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked out. And so we just want to come back here and really pour into what this region has, and then partner with the church here and the ministries that we have here, and to really help grow and pour into what the Lord is doing here. Because I've gone to several churches, big, small, whatever, and what we're doing on even a small scale, it matches some bigger churches, and that's a humble brag to a degree, but also is the purity of what we're seeing is unmatched, and it's not really out there. And a lot of the protocols that we were seeing, that I know of, and I've went through, and I've gone through the prophetic classes and the prophetic schools with John, and when my dad was teaching them, that's not out there. And there's a lot of chaotic, as far as even in the church, that there needs to be some guidance that's out there. And that's kind of something, that's why Olive School of Ministry exists, is because of the out there stuff. And even a lot of the heretic hunters, there is a bit of truth to what they're saying. And so that's what we're trying to build here is some fathering into that movement. And that's kind of why really the Lord has brought us back here, is to kind of join in, be a part of that, and grow, especially in this movement here for me specifically in the pipeline in the news industry. Is we have to, as believers, understand how to split the difference. Is okay, there's some good ideas coming from the left, there's some good ideas coming from the right, there's some ideas coming from the center, but we have to realize how we have to split the hairs on what aren't just good ideas, what are God ideas, and how to walk forward with that, and not how to be so emotionally tied to, the political party we have on our driver's license or whatever. Is learning how to really split the hairs and hearing what the Father's telling us, so that we can have a balance and not be rocked back and forth by the way the winds are blowing, and get so emotionally caught and be deceived by what you're seeing here today from what some of these politicians are doing and playing these political games of trying to get people motivated. Is if we can have a group, we talked about that 318 company, have a group who is joined together, understanding why they're being, as Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, of being mindful, not so mindless, of even, he's talking and speaking in tongues there, but just living in life, taking captive every thought. And so, to make a long story short, that's why we're here. We realized for our family, obviously having the connection with family to be a part of and join was a crucial part, and grow our family here. And North Carolina it was a good season for us to be there, and we love the people who were there. We bless them and bless the churches that we were a part of. And they're growing, and they're walking in what they're called to be. But for us and our family, we just had a different call to step aside and to move here and be here with everybody else that's growing here.
Well, we're glad to have Zach, of course, as our family, but it's more importantly his work here in the ministry, leading our media department, and he'll have other responsibilities now that he's here. We're so glad for our team. As a matter of fact, the guy on the other side of the camera here, Eric Lawley, wonderful guy in our team, and he's been doing a lot of work, and Zach and him been working together. A lot of the media you see with him and Hannah, the partner there that works with him here at the church, they're doing some amazing stuff in our media department, and we're so thankful for that. And Zach's been mentoring them and training them, and we're ecstatic with where we are and where we're going to be in the future. And especially with this ministry, we really want to grow it. I want to say this: starting next week, we're going to start doing some prayer initiatives also for the states. For the election, we're going to each week try to take X amount of states. We're not sure. We're going to have to rightly divide them up, but until the election, to pray over those states, and so participate with us as well as that. It's not going to be on the Monday part, but probably on the Tuesday noon project we'll be doing that, where we'll be praying for the states for the coming election. Don't forget Olive School of Ministry. We still are taking, it's the last week, take applications for our fall semester. If you're interested in being a full-time school ministry, you can go to olivesm.org, and you can look at that site and learn more about us there. For each one of you that's been sowing into the ministry through our app, our website, thank you so much. It's such a blessing. The fact that we have lights, we have cameras, we have all this right now is because of your sowing. We want to thank you for that. It's a big, big, big blessing to all of us that you've done that. And you can continue to do that there. Go to our website, christiancenterstreetreporter.com, or our app, and you can find the give button there, and you can just put in there whatever the Lord tells you to give in whatever department he tells you to give. We are just so grateful for that. We'll be back online Wednesday night with with our Ministry of Reconciliation message still online. This our sabbatical ends after Wednesday, and then next week we'll be back to regular schedule. So God bless you. Have a good day. We'll talk to you